8 months pregnant, alone, covered in mud. I was hammering nails into a cabin frame. Everyone said would collapse, but they didn't see what I was really building, a way out. Every swing of that hammer was louder than their silence. Then he showed up, a wealthy stranger on horseback, standing on the ridge like he owned the wind. He didn't offer help, he just watched. And the moment he stepped closer, my world, my land, my name, my fight started to unravel. This isn't a rescue story, it's a reckoning, and it begins with a woman they tried to erase and the life she nailed into the ground, one beam at a time. I was 8 months pregnant the first time I swung a hammer against the frame of my future. The nail bent sideways, my wrist throbbed, but I didn't stop. The frost hadn't melted off the grass yet, and I could see my breath fogging in the morning air. My flannel sleeves were rolled to the elbows, soaked from hauling timber uphill. The wheelbarrow had given out 2 days ago. I dragged the planks by rope, like some stubborn ox refusing to die. My hands were cracked, my belly heavy. I hadn't looked in a mirror in weeks. But I wasn't building this cabin to be seen. I was building it to exist. The town of Granger had only 2 paved roads and more gossip than grain. The moment I showed up with my battered truck, oversized belly, and blueprints rolled under my arm, I became a walking headline. There's a girl out on Sycamore clearing land, all by herself, ain't even got a ring. No one said it to my face. They just stared longer than they needed to, offered smiles too small. I learned quickly not to ask for help. Help came with strings or worse, sermons. So I kept my head down, found the line between pride and survival, and stood square on it. The land was cheap because it had history. Unbuildable, they said. Too rocky, too slope. That just meant no one else wanted it, which made it perfect. I'd traded everything I had, savings, inheritance, even a pair of diamond earrings I once swore I'd pass down to a daughter to buy this slope. This mess, this freedom. And then that morning, he appeared. At first I thought he was just another silhouette in the fog, tall with the kind of posture that said he didn't flinch. He sat on horseback at the crest of the hill, motionless, except for the shifting reins. The animal pawed at the dirt, but the man didn't move. He was watching me. I didn't wave. I didn't ask what he wanted. I drove another nail into the frame, felt it fight me, and shoved harder. He stayed there, quiet and unmoving, like he was waiting for something, or maybe deciding whether to speak, but he didn't, and neither did I. I went back to work, because there was no time for strangers, not when my ribs ached from sleepless nights, and my ankles throbbed with every step. Not when the baby kicked hard against my spine like he knew what I was up against, and wanted to help. I whispered to him sometime, when the hammer slipped or the nights grew too still, "You and me, kid, that's all we've got, but that's going to be enough." No one told me how lonely freedom could feel. Back when I still lived in a house that echoed with someone else's footsteps, I thought solitude was something noble, romantic even. I imagined it as mornings with coffee and soft jazz, long walks, books with worn spines. But this was different. This was washing splinters out of your palms with cold water and gritting your teeth because you can't cry and build at the same time. This was eating canned soup with a spoon bent from prying open too many lids. This was waking up at 3 a.m. to a fox scream and lying there wondering if you made the biggest mistake of your life or the bravest choice you'd ever dare. And still, I stayed because every wall I framed meant one less thing I owed anyone. Because every night I didn't go back was a victory. Because every morning I woke up and felt him move inside me, I knew this was not failure. This was creation. I met the cowboy in the feed store a week later. He was buying fencing wire. I was buying nails. We reached for the same box. His hand brushed mine. He pulled back first. "You're the one building out on Sycamore," he said. His voice was lower than I expected, gravel and velvet. I didn't answer. You need help, he asked, not unkindly. I looked at his boots, too clean, and then into his eyes, green, like pine needles and old money. No, I said, but I could use space. He tilted his head like he wasn't used to hearing no. I'm Colt, he said. I'm busy, I replied, and just like that, he let me go. For a while anyway, but he kept showing up. Not at my cabin, not directly. He'd appear along the ridge or at the gas station. Once I caught him at the edge of the forest with a notebook in his hand, sketching maybe, or writing. I never asked. The town called him a gentleman rancher, which I came to learn meant he inherited land, dressed too well to work it, and paid others to sweat in his name. But he was different than the others in one small way. He didn't pity me. He watched me with something else, curiosity maybe, maybe something deeper. It wasn't romantic. Not then. It was like watching a storm you can't explain. You don't want to run. You just want to see what it does next. That first month on the land, I didn't cry. Not when my roof tarp tore in the windstorm. Not when the deer ate my planted herbs. Not even when I split open my knuckle and wrapped it in a torn shirt sleeve just to finish setting the beams. But one night when the stars were so close they felt like accusations, I folded to my knees in the frame of the unfinished cabin and whispered, "Please let me finish this before he comes." I wasn't talking about Colt. I meant my son. Because the truth no one wants to hear is this: you can love a child before he's born, fiercely, desperately, but you can also be terrified he'll arrive before you've given him something better than what you escaped. I didn't leave because I was kicked out. I didn't leave because I was cheated on, or broken, or betrayed. I left because I realized one morning that I had disappeared inside someone else's life. And when I looked in the mirror, belly already showing, I saw a woman whose silence was growing louder than her heartbeat. That day I packed everything I could carry, left a note on the kitchen table that simply said, "I want more than this," and I drove until I found dirt roads and a mountain that didn't ask me for anything. That's how I found Sycamore Hill. That's how I found myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's how I became something worth witnessing. I stopped counting the days after the third week. There's something about being out here beyond the sidewalks and sympathetic glances that changes how time feels. It doesn't move in hours or clocks anymore. It moves in how long it takes the morning sun to warm your boots, or how many hammer swings your wrists can take before going numb. Out here, time is measured by how many small defeats you survive before the wind changes. The wind always sometimes it screamed through the trees, flapping my tarp like angry wings. Sometimes it whispered through the cracks in the plywood and reminded me of every vow I'd swallowed. But most days it carried silence, heavy, deliberate silence. And I'd learned to live with that. There's a special kind of quiet when you've chosen to be alone. It's not peaceful, it's not even brave, it's surgical. You cut away the noise, the people, the parts of yourself that beg for softness, and you keep what doesn't break. That's what I did. Not because I'm fearless, because I was tired of apologizing for breathing. People love the idea of a strong woman until she stops asking for permission. When I first told folks I was building the cabin by myself, they blinked like I'd said I was growing wings. You can't do that in your condition. You need a man's help. Think about the baby. I was thinking about the baby. I thought about him every time I went to sleep, under a half-finished roof with rain tapping on the tarp like cold fingers. I thought about him every time I checked the joists, double and triple. Every time I picked up a piece of wood I shouldn't have, or worked longer than my spine wanted. He was the reason I kept breathing through the pain. But I never said that aloud. Because people don't understand the kind of love that doesn't look like a nursery and lullaby. They don't understand the kind of woman who leaves not because she hates someone, but because she refuses to hate herself anymore. I didn't run from a man, I walked away from becoming invisible. It wasn't just the words that had worn me down. It was the in-between moment, the silences after a decision was made for me, the way praise was given in exchange for shrinking, the slow erasure of dreams because they didn't fit the picture. I remember the last meal I made before I left: grilled salmon, roasted rosemary potatoes, a butter salad I didn't even like, everything perfect, everything quiet. He complimented the plating, then asked if I'd remembered to schedule his dry cleaning. That's when I knew I was more useful than loved, more decoration than partner, and that terrified me. Not because I'd been lied to, but because I had agreed to every "sure, honey," every sign, every smile I faked at dinners where people spoke around me. Not to me. I had been a willing ghost, polite, pleasant, pretty. And then I saw two pink lines and realized I was about to bring a child into that. A boy who'd grow up watching his mother fold herself into quieter and quieter corners. Or worse, a girl who'd learned to do the same. So I left before I could forget how to be loud. Out here, I yell when I need to. Curse when the wind steals my blueprint. Laugh when the hammer slips and misses my thumb by a miracle. There's no one to tell me I'm too emotional, or too intense, or too much. Just me, the trees, and the rhythm of work. Sometimes I sing, not because I sound good, Lord knows I don't, but because sometimes I talk to the baby like he's already here. Tell him about the beams I reinforced, the food I rationed, the dreams I had before I forgot what dreaming felt like. I hope you like trees, I told him once, sitting on a stump with my swollen feet in a bucket of cool creek water. I hope you don't mind mud under your nails and the smell of cedar in your clothes. I hope you laugh a lot, loud and free. There's a picture I keep folded in my coat pocket. Not of anyone I left, but of what I wanted. A picture of a house drawn in colored pencil, scrawled line, a big front porch, a swing hanging from a beam. I drew it years ago on a napkin at a diner, back when dreaming felt safe. I found it in a box of old notes I packed in a rush. I unfolded it the first night on the land, stared at it with tears I refused to let fall, and now I carry it like scripture. That cabin, my cabin, isn't just walls and wood, it's defiance carved into architecture. A woman once told me, "You can measure your worth by how well you're loved. I think you measure it by how fiercely you choose yourself when no one else does." Colt kept his distance for a while after our first meeting at the store. But now and then, I'd catch him at the edge of the property line, not close enough to intrude, just there, watching, almost respectfully. One afternoon, I saw him ride past and tip his hat without a word. I didn't wave back, but something shifted in my chest. Not because I wanted anything from him, not even trust, but because for the first time I didn't feel watched, I felt witnessed. And that's different. There's something about being seen without expectation that makes you feel more real. Like maybe your struggle isn't invisible. Like maybe the wind isn't the only thing hearing your prayers. I didn't need a savior, I needed a witness. Someone to see the dirt under my nails and not mistake it for weakness. Someone to see me, really see me, and not ask for smaller. I wasn't sure Colt could be that, but he hadn't tried to fix me, and that in itself was rare. The night after I finished the third wall, a storm rolled in like a freight train. Thunder cracked over the hills, and lightning lit up the bones of my unfinished roof like a skeleton. I stood beneath the tarp, drenched and trembling, not from fear but from something deeper, grief. Maybe, grief for the life I almost settled for, the girl I almost became. I screamed into the night, loud and wild and full of everything I'd swallowed for years. The wind carried it, and I swear, in that moment, something in me shifted. The kind of shift that doesn't come with music or applause, but with quiet relief. I wasn't broken, I was rebuilding, and maybe that's what the wind was always trying to tell me. That the world would keep moving, that storms would come. But if I stayed rooted, if I kept my hands on the wood and my eyes on the horizon, then maybe, just maybe, this cabin would become more than shelter. It would become proof that I existed, that I chose, that I didn't plan to dig that deep. But when you're building something from scratch, you find yourself doing a lot of things you never planned. I was trying to trench a path for drainage, just enough to keep the cabin from flooding when the rains came heavier. The ground was hard-packed clay, peppered with stones that bit into the blade of my shovel. Every step back, every plunge forward made my ribs tighten. My belly was a stubborn weight, pulsing with life and pressure. The baby kicked sometimes when I bent too far. A reminder, still here, Mama. Don't you forget me? I never could. The sun was hot that day, unusually hot for fall, and I could feel sweat trailing down my spine. The kind of sweat that smells like iron. I wiped my brow with the inside of my elbow and kept digging. 4 feet in, the shovel hit something. Not like stone, not like root. It clanged. I froze. That sound, metal against metal in the middle of nowhere, sent a jolt through my chest. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the topsoil with my bare hands. There it was, rusted, square, a metal box wedged deep and crooked. I rocked it loose with the heel of my boot. It was heavy. Not impossibly so, but dense, like it had waited a long time to be noticed. I carried it to the porch beam and sat on the dirt beside it. My breath was short from the haul. My stomach tightened again, the baby responding to my nerves. I whispered, "It's okay, just a box. We'll open it together." The latch gave with a little coaxing and a lot of will. Inside, a tangle of parchment, faded photos, brittle maps, letters wrapped in twine, one envelope marked in black ink, Maddox Family Holdings, private. Maddox, Colt. My stomach dropped, not from the weight of the baby, but something colder. I pulled the documents out slowly, like touching memories that didn't belong to me. A land deed. Dated decades back, coordinates that matched Sycamore Hill. A signature, James Maddox, Colt's grandfather. If I remembered the town gossip correctly. The next paper confirmed it. Transfer of property for private timber lease. Except the name beneath the buyer's line had been crossed out in pencil. Beneath it, a scribbled note in the margins. Reclaimed under duress. Do not record. I sat still for a long time. Long enough for the wind to start up again, pushing dry leaves into the edges of my porch frame. I could hear the whisper of them dragging against the wood like whispers that had waited too long to be heard. The truth hit slow and hard. This land was never supposed to be for sale. Somewhere down the line, someone had taken it, hidden the transfer, buried the evidence, literally, maybe to develop it, maybe to sell it back to the Maddox family, maybe just to erase someone else's name from the record. And now here I was, 8 months pregnant, broke, barely breathing, building my dream home on land that might still belong to someone else. I should have panicked, should have cried, should have packed up the box, hiked down to the courthouse, and begged someone to explain how this happened. But instead, I wrapped the box in one of my old flannel shirts, tucked it under the workbench, and kept building. Because fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. And because part of me, some bone-deep, wind-swept part, knew that if this land was trying to speak, it had chosen me for a reason. The next day, Colt returned. He didn't ride in like a cowboy in a movie. No thunder of hooves, no wind-swept drama. Just a man in a black jacket on a quiet horse, stopping near the ridge like he always did. But this time he dismounted. He walked up the slope with careful steps, pausing a few yards from where I stood. Sawing a 2x4. "You found it," he said. I didn't look up. "You knew?" "My grandfather buried it after the deal fell through. I was a kid, but I remember watching him dig out here one night." I stopped sawing. "What deal?" He looked at the half-finished cabin, at the mud on my boots, at the sweat bleeding through my shirt. His face shifted like he wasn't sure which truth to land on. "My family used to own this hill," he said quietly. "Sold and tried to get it back under the table. It's been in legal limbo for years. I didn't think anyone would ever buy it, let alone build on it." I let the silence hang, the kind that feels heavier than any argument. He stepped closer. "You have a right to be here. If you bought it in good faith. Doesn't matter, I said. Right and legal aren't always the same. He looked down at his boots, suddenly uncomfortable. Some folks back in town, they might push. They've been trying to develop the hill. If they find out what you uncovered, they'll come for it, I finished. He nodded. I leaned the saw against the beam and crossed my arms over my belly. I didn't come here to start a war, I said. I came here because this was the only place that didn't ask me to be anything I wasn't. I know, he said, softer than before. That's why I'm telling you first. A strange silence settled between us, not angry, not resigned, just heavy, like we both knew what came next. I gestured toward the unfinished porch. If they try to take this from me, I'll fight. Colt's jaw tightened. I hope you do. And with that, he turned and walked back toward his horse. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask him to. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, carrying the weight of everything I didn't know how to hold. What scared me wasn't the land title, or the possibility of legal fights, or even the idea that I might have to leave. What scared me was how much this place had already become mine, how the beams and the mud and the sweat had stitched themselves into me, how the baby shifted gently inside me now when I stepped into the frame, like he knew this was home. I lit the lantern and walked the perimeter, barefoot in the dirt, whispered promises to the shadow. We're not going anywhere. I built this with my hands. No one's taking it. And deep down, even if I didn't want to admit it, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the tremor before the storm. The red sky came first, the kind of sunset that looked painted in blood and fire, too vivid to trust. It stretched wide over Sycamore Hill, casting long shadows across the beams of my unfinished roof and turning every nailhead into a glinting eye. I watched it from the frame of my cabin, my boots dangling off the porch edge, my belly round as a harvest moon. The wind had stilled. It always did right before something broke. I didn't need Colt to tell me things were shifting. I could feel it in the eyes of the cashier at the feed store, in the way old Mr. Higgins stopped offering his leftover nails, in how Marla, the woman who once gave me apples for free, now stared through me like I was already gone. They'd found out about the deed, the buried box, the land's confusion. Colt hadn't said a word since our last talk, but silence carries messages louder than shouting. On the morning of the meeting, I found a folded notice tucked under a rock at the base of my cabin steps. Town council requesting my presence. Discussion regarding land usage, ownership discrepancies, and community development. That's what they called it. I knew what it was. A reckoning. The meeting was held in the old church at the edge of town, the only space big enough to hold both people and judgment. I arrived early, wearing the only dress I had that wasn't stained with sawdust. My boots were still muddy, and I didn't bother to hide the tired circles under my eyes. Let them see what survival looked like. The pews filled slowly. Council members sat stiff-backed at the altar like saints carved from stone. The room buzzed with heat and whispers, faces turned, some pitying, some hostile. No one looked me in the eye, until Colt walked in. He didn't sit beside me. He stood along the wall, arms crossed, hat in hand, watching. A woman I didn't recognize took the podium. Sharp suit, lips like a blade. A lawyer hired, I assumed, by someone who didn't believe I'd walk away quietly. She spoke for 12 minutes straight, words like easement, unauthorized build, unresolved claimants, risk to infrastructure. Every word felt like a brick on my chest. When she finished, the room waited, and then the council chair turned to me. Ms. Rhodes, would you like to respond? I stood, throat dry, palms damp. I bought this land with everything I had, I began. My voice shook, legally. Through a realtor who said it was clear. I've put my back, my hands, and my unborn child's future into every inch of it. I didn't steal anything. I didn't hide anything. I just wanted a place to call mine. Whispers, a cough, someone snorted in the back. I looked down at my boots, at the growing curve of my belly. Then I looked up. My cabin might not be pretty, I said. It might not be a part of your town's vision or your development dreams, but it's the first thing I've ever built that wasn't built for someone else. Silence followed me back to my seat. Then another voice broke the hush. Colt, I can confirm the deed was mishandled, he said, stepping forward. My family was involved. They covered up the land's transfer years ago, tried to reclaim it illegally. Miss Rhodes didn't know. She's not at fault. A hush ran through the church like a gasp that never quite exhaled. The lawyer turned sharply. Mr. Maddox, I wasn't informed you would be speaking. I'm not speaking for you, he said calmly. I'm speaking for the truth. That's when it began, the shift. People started muttering. Why would he defend her? Does he have something to gain? She's just playing the victim. Look at her, using that baby. I stood again before I meant to. I'm not asking for your help, I said, louder this time. I'm asking for space, to live, to raise my child, to finish something I started. I'm not a threat. I'm not a scheme. I'm just a woman who stopped asking permission to exist. And for a moment, a single fragile moment, it worked. No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one shouted either. The council chair nodded tightly. We'll take it under review. The meeting ended with the scrape of pews and the rustle of people pretending they hadn't just watched something real happen. Outside, the red sky had deepened into bruised purple. Storm coming. Colt caught up to me on the steps. They'll stall, he said. Make you wait, try to wear you down. I won't break. I know. We didn't speak after that. He walked toward his truck, I toward mine. But something in me, some tether I'd tried to keep cut, was stirring again. Not because he defended me, but because for the first time, I didn't feel alone walking out of that room. That night the wind returned. But this time it didn't scream. It howled soft and low, like breath through broken wood. I stood on my porch under the stars and listened. Not for danger, but for strength, and I found it rooted deep, silent and sure. Not in Colt, not in the town, but in the boards I had nailed, in the walls I had raised, in the baby moving inside me. They could stall all they wanted, delay, threaten, gossip, but I was here, and I was staying. The rain returned 2 nights after the meeting, sudden and heavy, like the sky had finally given up holding it in. I lay on the floor of the unfinished cabin, belly stretched high, my back aching against the plywood. The tarp overhead flapped violently. I'd nailed it down 3 times already, but the wind always found its way back in. There's a particular loneliness in hearing water drip inside a house you built. It feels like the world is laughing. I pressed a hand to my belly, whispering calm. It's okay, baby. I'm here. I'm here. Thunder rolled over Sycamore Hill. The kind that sounds too close, too personal. I lit the lantern and pulled my boots on. Every joint in my body protested, but I moved anyway. If the support beams were weakening, I needed to know before the wind decided to test me. Outside, the world was silver and screaming. Trees bowed, mud churned. The frame of the house groaned against the pressure. And that's when I saw the flicker. Down by the edge of the woods, something moving, small, fast, frantic. At first I thought it was a raccoon, but then I saw the limping, the shake, the ears. A pup, a young coyote, soaked and shivering, one paw dragging uselessly behind it. I should have left it. That's what survival looks like, right? Hard choices. No room for weakness. No time for compassion. But then it looked at me, those wide dark eyes, and I saw it. Me, back when I first arrived, hollow and stubborn, drenched, shaking, unwelcome. So I did what I shouldn't have. I walked toward it. Slow, careful, one hand out. I won't hurt you, I said. You're okay now. It didn't trust me, not really. But it didn't run either. And that was enough. I brought it inside, wrapped it in an old blanket. It growled once, then gave up, too tired to fight. I made a little nest for it near the fire pit and lit the flame low. For a moment we just sat there. Me, belly round with a baby who hadn't yet seen the sky, and a broken animal that might not see the morning. Two creatures the world had already decided were too fragile to survive. But there we were, breathing anyway. The rain lasted through the next day and into the evening. I couldn't work, couldn't haul. So I cleaned, wrote a list of supplies I couldn't afford, brushed the pup's fur while it slept. He was still breathing but shallow. I didn't know how to help him beyond warmth and silence. By the time the sun broke through, the pup was gone. Not dead, just gone. Slipped away before dawn. Maybe back into the woods. Maybe into whatever wild place he called home. I didn't cry, but I sat on the step and let the grief come anyway. Not for him. For all the things I couldn't hold on to. That's when Colt arrived. He didn't knock, just called my name softly from the path. I stood, wiped my eyes and stepped outside. You okay? He asked. Fine, I said. Too quickly. He looked at the roof. Storm held better than I thought. I double-nailed the braces, I replied. Didn't sleep, but it stood. There was a pause. And then he handed me a folded piece of paper. They're moving forward, he said. The council. Legal review starts next week. My throat tightened. Of course they were. They want to bring in Laurel. I looked up sharply. Laurel, I asked. He nodded. My sister. She's the one who wanted the hill in the first place. She's been trying to buy it back for development. Now she sees your cabin as a liability. What kind of liability? The kind that reminds people what home should look like. I laughed, dry and bitter. She's threatened by some plywood, and a pregnant woman with a hammer? She's threatened by you, Delilah. I didn't want to hear that. Didn't want to be anyone's threat. Just wanted to exist without someone trying to evict my worth. But here it was. Again, a woman walking quietly, choosing her own path. And somehow that alone became rebellion. Colt sat down on the step beside me, his voice quieter now. She doesn't just want to sue you, he said. She wants to smear you. I turned to him. What does that mean? He hesitated. She's already talking to the realtor, trying to make it sound like you misled them, that you bought under false pretenses, that you manipulated someone. I stared at him. That's a lie. I know. She can't prove anything. She doesn't need to, just has to make people uncomfortable enough to stop caring. The wind blew through again. Cold this time. It stung. I won't leave, I said. I didn't think you would. But still he looked worried. And that scared me more than anything. Later that night, I stood in the frame of what would be the nursery. There was no crib, no wallpaper, no rocking chair, just beams and hope. I imagined holding him, my son, wrapped in a worn quilt, his tiny fingers curling around mine. I imagined whispering stories into his ear about the stars, about trees, about how strong his mother had to be before he ever arrived. And then the sound came, a sharp crack, wood splitting. I turned, hard in my throat. It wasn't the cabin. It was the fence, one of the outer support beams, the one I'd set hurriedly during the first week, had given way. It had been just a brace to mark the boundary, but someone had taken an axe to it. I ran to it, boots sliding in mud, there carved into the raw wood. Get out. My breath caught. No signature, no name, just the message, a warning. I sank to my knees in the dirt and stared at it. This wasn't legal pressure now. This was personal. I wasn't just inconvenient anymore. I was unwanted. That night, I didn't sleep. But I didn't cry either. Instead, I got up before dawn, grabbed a new beam, and re-nailed the post in silence. Then I carved something into the fresh wood. She didn't knock. Laurel Maddox stepped onto my land like she already owned it, heels sinking into the wet ground, sunglasses too dark for a cloudy morning. The kind of woman who smelled like inheritance and courtroom winds. Her hair was neat, not a strand out of place. Her coat looked like it cost more than my truck, and when she smiled, it wasn't warmth, it was strategy. I stood by the cabin frame, hammer still in hand. My belly was a full moon now, heavy and urgent. You must be Delilah Rhodes, she said, pulling off her glasses. Colt's latest charity project. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. You're taller than I imagined, and a lot dirtier. Still, I said nothing. I wouldn't give her the pleasure of a reaction. Laurel surveyed the land, the half-finished porch, the scattered lumber, the hand-dug trench lines. Well, she sighed, it's quaint, looks like a Pinterest board died and reincarnated as a shack. I finally spoke. If you came here to insult my nails and call it litigation, save your breath. Oh no, she said. I came to make an offer. She pulled a file from her leather bag and held it out. I didn't take it. You have no legal standing here, she continued. The sale you made was built on a deed that should have been void. My family has been trying to reverse that paperwork for years. It's only a matter of time before a judge does it for us. I folded my arms. Then why are you here? If you're so sure you'll win, she smiled again, sharper this time. Because court takes time, and money, and attention. You're already under pressure. You're pregnant, alone, no electricity, no stability. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd want to walk away with something. Her tone softened falsely, like she was offering tea. $500,000, she said. That's what I came to offer. The number hit me like a slap. 500,000. I could build a new cabin, buy land with plumbing, put the baby in a nursery with real walls. I could sleep without fear, stop rationing, maybe even rest. Laurel stepped closer. This place isn't safe, and it never will be. No matter how many nails you drive into the ground, you can be proud or you can be smart, but you can't be both. I looked past her, toward the carved fence posts still standing from the night before. Staying, I looked back at Laurel, and then I laughed. It wasn't polite. It wasn't charming. It was loud, raw, and real. Laurel blinked, taken aback. What's funny? You are, I said. You think money's the answer to everything, that every woman has a price, if the check's big enough, that the only future worth having is one you can decorate with granite countertops and investor brochures. Her smile faltered. I stepped forward. Let me tell you something, Laurel. I'm not here because I got lost. I'm not here because your brother found me. I'm here because this land let me breathe again. And no amount of your daddy's money is going to change that. She tried to speak, but I didn't stop. You see mud. I see freedom. You see risk. I see rebirth. I've bled for these walls. I've starved for these beams. I've screamed into this soil until my voice broke. I didn't come here to build a house. I came here to become someone worth raising a child inside. Silence. Just the wind, soft and respectful. Then Laurel stepped back. Her face was colder now. This isn't over, she said. You've embarrassed my family. You've undermined $1 million deal. I promise you, Delilah, I don't lose. And then she walked off. No more offers. No more smiles. Just heels crunching back across the gravel and a car door slamming like a gavel. That night Colt came. I was on the porch, reinforcing the frame. Laurel had walked past like it was beneath her. He didn't say hello, just handed me a wrapped cloth. Inside it a mason jar of homemade nails. He made them himself, I could tell. I looked up at him. She offered me $500,000. His face stiffened. I figured she would. She said, you're not part of the family anymore. He didn't flinch. I'm not. Because of me. He paused. No, he said. Because of who I became after meeting you. I didn't answer, but my hands trembled slightly as I took the jar. Not because of the money, but because for the first time someone had chosen me over bloodlines. The next few days passed in a blur of hammer swings and sleepless nights. I worked until my hands ached, until my back cried out, until the baby kicked in protest. But I kept going, because I knew something now. This wasn't just about land. It never had been. This was about being unmovable in a world that wanted me silent. This was about telling my unborn son, "You come from a woman who doesn't fold." But my body had other plans. On the fourth morning after Laurel's visit, I woke to pain, sharp, deep, low. I braced myself against the wall and tried to breathe through it. False alarm, maybe. The baby wasn't due yet. I wasn't ready. I hadn't even finished the last beam. But life doesn't care about timelines. So I whispered again, "We're okay. We're okay." Even if I wasn't sure. The day after Laurel left, I found a fresh set of boot prints in the mud leading up to the edge of my cabin. They didn't match mine, and they didn't match Colt's either. No damage, no vandalism this time, just presence. The kind meant to unsettle, like someone wanted me to know they'd been there, watching. That kind of silence doesn't scare me anymore. I just nailed another beam and whispered to my baby, "They want us gone, which means we matter." Colt didn't come for 3 days. When he did, his shirt was torn, and his eyes carried the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from lifting things, but from holding everything in. He looked older than the last time I saw him. Not in years. In weight. "What happened?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, sat on the porch step like it had been waiting for him. Laurel froze my accounts. My breath hitched. "All of them?" I asked. He nodded. "My inheritance. The ranch fund, even my emergency savings." Said I was abusing resources by backing your claim, that I was compromising family interests. I sat down beside him, the porch creaking beneath our shared exhaustion. "What now?" He gave a bitter smile. "Now I'm broke." We sat in silence for a long time. Two people who once had safety, security, and a name worth something, now sitting on raw wood, waiting for the world to take its next swing. "I can't pay my workers," he said. "Half of them already left. The ranch's livestock are being moved. Laurel's claiming mismanagement. The papers will eat it up." "You're risking everything," I said. He looked at me, that soft, clear way of, "No," he replied. "I'm risking nothing worth keeping if it meant leaving you out here to fight alone." I didn't know what to say, so I reached over and took his hand, calloused, warm, shaking a little, just like mine. The town turned colder after that. You can always feel it before you see it. First, the bakery stopped letting me refill my water jug, said their well was low despite the rain. Then the lumber yard ran out of boards in my requested size. Then the whispers came back. "She's dragging him down. She's playing him. She's not from here. She'll leave when the baby comes." But I didn't flinch, because every time they shut a door, I nailed another beam. Every time they turned away, I turned inward. Because if they were trying to scare me, they forgot something. I'd already survived leaving everything I once thought I needed, and I wasn't about to run from strangers with weak backbones and louder mouths. Colt tried to keep showing up, tried to bring small things, extra nails, leftover soup, a small heater he'd bartered for after selling a saddle. But I saw it wearing on him, the bags under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was losing everything, and I couldn't stop it. "You don't have to fix this," I told him one night, our breath turning visible in the cabin's half-lit shell. "I'm not trying to fix you," he said. "I'm standing with you." And there it was, the difference no one else ever understood. He didn't come to take over. He came to stay. The night the townspeople turned on him publicly, I wasn't there to see it, but he told me later in pieces. There was a gathering at the feed co-op, a kind of unofficial concerned citizens meeting. The kind they hold when they want to ruin someone but need a facade of righteousness. They stood up one by one, talked about legacy, talked about the Maddox name, talked about protecting community interests, and preserving the economy. Then someone brought up Colt's involvement with me. A woman named Ruth Delaney, who once tried to sell me expired baby formula for double the price, stood and said, "That woman has no husband. No Ruth. She's building something that'll fall apart when the next storm comes. And Colt's sacrificing his bloodline for it." That's the word that stuck. Bloodline. as if worth was measured by last names and trust funds, as if love and truth and backbone didn't count unless they came with matching napkins and a pedigree. Colt stood up, didn't yell, didn't argue. He just said, "Sometimes you have to burn down the house you were raised in if you ever want to feel warmth again." Then he left. The next morning, I found a bag on my porch. No note, just a bundle of baby clothes neatly folded, and a loaf of bread wrapped in parchment, from someone who hadn't spoken to me in weeks. A silent apology, a beginning. That night I worked by lantern until my fingers ached. Every nail I drove into the walls, I drove with a different name in my head. Every woman who'd been called too much. Every man who'd been cast out for choosing kindness over compliance. Every child who needed a home built from truth instead of silence. Colt came by late. Didn't say a word, just picked up a board and started measuring beside me. We worked until midnight, and then sitting on the floor, surrounded by the scent of pine and sawdust, he pulled a folded paper from his jacket, a printout of a sale agreement, his share of the Maddox Ranch. He'd sold it. The land, the livestock, his name, all of it. I stared at him, my throat raw. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, "because I believe in something again. And it's not land, it's not bloodlines, it's not legacy." He touched the edge of the beam we'd just nailed. The last frost came and went like an apology. The morning after, I stepped outside to find the earth softer beneath my boots, like it had finally exhaled. The wind was warm, gentle, even. Not a warning, not a test, just a whisper of something new. Spring had arrived, and with it, breath, not relief, not victory, just breath. Colt had sold the last of his ranch by then. He came to the cabin every day now, not as a landowner, not as a legacy, but as a man who had chosen to start over, like me. He brought coffee in a dented thermos and wildflower seeds in his pocket. "Plant them near the porch," he said one morning. "So when he's born, he'll have color to look at." I laughed. "He won't care about flowers." Colt smiled. That soft, secret kind of smile. "Maybe not, but you will." And I did. I planted them one quiet afternoon, down by the fence line where the gyout had once been carved. Now that post held something else. Tiny green shoots, pushing through dirt like hope, refusing to be buried. I planted every seed with care, pressed each into the ground like a promise. I whispered things I hadn't said out loud. "You are safe, you are loved, you are wanted." The wind caught my voice and carried it, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry from grief. I cried from gratitude, because even here in a town that tried to erase me, on land built from betrayal, I had found something gentle, not perfect, not easy, but real. Colt stayed late most nights now. Sometimes we worked, sometimes we just sat. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix, he was just there, and sometimes that's all a soul needs. One night, I told him, "You don't have to stay." He looked at me, head tilted. "I'm not staying for you," he said. "I'm staying because I'm done running from who I'm not." I didn't ask him what he meant. He didn't offer more, but I knew. We both knew. The cabin was nearly finished. We put up drywall together, painted the nursery a soft clay color, like riverbank soil. I made curtains out of old fabric scraps. Colt carved a cradle from reclaimed pine. It rocked when the wind nudged it, like it already knew its job. I found myself humming again. Not because I was happy, but because I wasn't afraid. There's a difference. Happiness is something people expect from you. Safety is something you fight tooth and nail to keep. And for the first time, I felt safe in my own breath. The townspeople didn't exactly warm to us overnight. Some still looked through me like fogged glass. But a few began waving. A few offered eggs, one even brought soup, and I took it. Not because I needed them, but because grace sometimes means letting people try again. Colt and I went to the harvest fair together, him in his worn denim, me in a dress I stitched from two torn ones. We didn't hold hands, we didn't kiss, but we stood side by side, and when we passed Laurel near the booths, her heels spotless, her smile plastic, Colt nodded once and walked on. She didn't speak to me, just watched, as if confused by a woman who refused to disappear. One morning, I found Colt on the porch early, watching the roses bloom. They'd come faster than expected, vibrant, messy, beautiful. I didn't think they'd survive, I said, kneeling beside them. He ran a thumb across a petal. Sometimes the ugliest soil grows the strongest things. He didn't mean the dirt, and I didn't need to ask what he was really saying. That night, I wrote a letter to my unborn son. Not because I was poetic, but because I needed to say something out loud. I folded the paper and tucked it into the cradle. I wanted him to know that he wasn't born from fear. He was born from defiance, from strength, from choosing softness even when the world only gave us edges. Then came the ache. Not the little one, not the Braxton Hicks I'd brushed off for weeks. This was different, deep, slow, rhythmic. The baby was coming. I'd prepared, bags packed, blankets cleaned, boiled water, a plan for everything. But in that moment, nothing felt ready. The cabin was too quiet, the wind was too still. I sat on the floor, knees bent, sweat already beginning to pool beneath my arms. And then the knock came. Colt. I had a feeling, he said, holding up a loaf of bread and a thermos. I let out a strangled laugh. Perfect timing. He didn't panic, didn't run. He simply lit the fire, checked the water, laid out towels, and sat beside me. I've never done this, I whispered. Me neither, he said. But we're gonna figure it out. The morning after the contractions faded, I woke to a pale orange sky and a sharp stillness that made the birds seem louder. The baby hadn't come, not yet. Just a warning, the body's way of saying soon. I sat on the porch with my hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, watching the wind move through the wild roses. They'd bloomed despite everything. Soil, storm, sabotage. I liked to think they were blooming for us. Colt had gone to town early to trade firewood for oats. The road stretched empty beyond the fence line, all dust and dew. Then I saw it, a rust-colored pickup crawling up the hill slow and cautious, like it didn't belong. My chest tightened. I didn't recognize the truck, but I knew the silhouette behind the wheel before she even stepped out. She parked near the clearing, killed the engine, sat there for a long time, hands still on the wheel. Then the door creaked open, and out stepped a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade. Nancy, my mother's sister, my aunt, my almost mother for a few years, until silence swallowed us both. Her hair had gone grayer than I remembered. Her walk was slower, but the way she scanned the land that was still the same, calculating, careful, like she expected judgment to rise up out of the soil. She stood at the edge of the cabin frame, one hand on the door beam, didn't speak, just looked at me. I didn't move, I didn't stand, I didn't invite her in. She finally spoke. You built this, I nodded. It's real, she said softly. I saw the photos online. Didn't believe it. I didn't build it for belief, I said. Silent. Then she looked down, kicking at the dirt with the toe of her boot. I got sick, she said. Few months ago. Docs say it's, well, not reversible. She waited like that should change something, like diagnosis could rewrite a decade of absence. I didn't flinch. Sick doesn't erase silence. I know, more silence. Then I didn't come to fix things. I came to see where you landed, before it's too late. I stared at her, at the lines time had carved into her face, at the shoulders that once carried me through grief, but dropped me when I stopped shrinking to fit her comfort. I didn't land, I said. I rose. She blinked. I stood, finally, not to welcome her, just to face her fully. You let them silence me, I said. When I spoke about feeling lost, about disappearing in someone else's life, you told me to be grateful. You said he's a good man, Delilah. He doesn't hit you. What more do you want? She nodded, shame finally softening her edges. I thought I was helping. I didn't understand then what that kind of quiet costs someone. I let her words hang. They didn't heal, but they acknowledged. And sometimes that's all we get. I didn't invite her into the cabin, but I made her tea. She sat on the step while I boiled water and crushed wild mint. I'm not asking to stay, she said, just to be close. You think this is where I want to reconcile? I asked. With the baby due, the town still circling, Laurel breathing lawsuits? I don't want reconciliation, she said. I just want to see the child you became, even for a moment. That line cracked something in me, because for all the fights, all the absence, there was still that echo, the child I used to be, the girl who once braided flowers into Nancy's hair and called her my favorite grown-up. I handed her the tea, watched her sip like it might scald away the guilt. We didn't say much after that, just sat, like the porch knew how to hold all the words we couldn't say. Colt returned at dusk with oats and jam. He paused when he saw Nancy, didn't speak, just gave a short nod, and stepped inside. Later I found him by the cradle, fingers brushing the carved edges. She family? He asked. She was. He looked at me carefully. Still is? I don't know. It was the truth. Over the next few days, Nancy lingered, didn't ask to stay, didn't offer help, just sat near the fire some evenings, sipping tea, telling small stories about my mother's garden, the one with morning glories, and a broken fence, the one she never let anyone walk through without permission. I lived not because I wanted to remember, but because sometimes grief only moves when memory makes space. She coughed more each night, woke up wheezing, but she never asked for care, never expected rescue. She was dying, quietly, unpretentiously, maybe the way she had lived. One night I asked her, why now? She didn't answer right away, just stared into the firelight. Then, because I wanted to see someone finish what they started. It didn't sound like apology, it sounded like surrender, and that somehow hurt less. When the contractions came again, they came hard, real this time, no warning flutters, no maybe this is it guesswork, just pain, deep, guttural, tidal. I gripped the edge of the workbench and called for Colt. He was there in seconds, Nancy too. We didn't plan this, didn't practice it, but somehow we did it. Three souls in a hand-built cabin, under the whisper of stars, catching breath and new life in the same moment. When it was over, I held my son against my chest, tears mixing with sweat, with joy, with something bigger than either. Colt leaned over, eyes wet, voice cracked. You did it. Nancy stood in the doorway, framed by roses, framed by ash, silent, still. Then she whispered, you gave him a name? I looked down at the baby. His eyes were barely open, his breath soft and uneven. River, I said. Why? I smiled. Because he came through the storm, and he kept moving. The morning after River was born, the sky was a color I'd never seen before. Not quite gold, not quite blue, just clean. Like something had been washed away overnight. The air smelled like cedar and new breath, the kind of scent that reminds you you're still here, even when you thought you'd reached your end. I sat on the porch, wrapped in Colt's old jacket, River tucked against my chest, his tiny fingers curling into the collar like he knew it once belonged to someone who stayed. Nancy was gone, left quietly before sunrise, a note folded neatly by the kettle. Thank you for letting me witness it. That was enough. I stared at that note for a long time. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like her final prayer, soft, unspoken, finished. Colt came out with a cup of tea, his steps careful on the porch boards. He sat beside me, not speaking, just watching River breathe. You think we'll be okay? I asked. He smiled, tired and sure. We already are. 2 days later, the letter arrived, stamped, formal, thick paper, Laurel's final play. A cease and desist order backed by her new development company. They'd filed to reclaim the land again, this time under the name Maddox Ridge Group, a subsidiary she created 2 weeks after Colt sold his shares. She hadn't given up, she'd just changed the name, because people like Laurel don't lose. They rebrand. I handed the letter to Colt. He read it, jaw tight. Then he folded it once and tossed it into the fire. The flames didn't protest. We knew she'd return eventually. And she did. 3 weeks later, in a black SUV, with tinted windows and two attorneys in tow, She parked at the edge of the fence line, stepped out in heels too sharp for mud, and looked around like everything she saw disgusted her. This ends today, she said, hands on hip. Colt stood beside me on the porch, River asleep in my arms. I think you mean starts today, I said calmly. She narrowed her eyes. I've already secured court approval to halt further construction. I raised my chin. This cabin is complete. She looked at the porch, the rose smoke curling from the chimney. Then she noticed something else. People, town folks. They were gathering, slowly, quietly. First Mr. Higgins with a sack of grain. Then Ruth Delaney. Yes, even Ruth, holding a basket of eggs. Then the teenage boy who once helped me carry lumber, and his mother, and two women from the bakery. They didn't say anything. They just stood near the property line. A wall made of witnesses. Laurel faltered. You think this crowd changes the law? No, I said. But it changes the story. She turned to Colt. You're willing to burn every bridge for her. He didn't blink. I'm not burning bridges. I'm planting new ones. Her lip curled. You're going to regret this. No, he said. You are. Then he stepped forward, handed her a single sheet of paper. His final severance filed, finalized, legal. He donated what remained of his Maddox trust to a rural women's shelter in his mother's name. You can keep the name, he said. I don't want it. Laurel's mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned, got in her SUV, and drove away. For the last time, the next few weeks passed in rhythm. River's cries, my hammering, Colt chopping wood, the kettle whistling, the wind brushing through wildflowers and fence beams. A life built slow, but solid. People began visiting more often. Not out of pity, but curiosity. They brought seeds, fabric, stories. One woman, a single mom named Erica, asked if I'd teach her how to build a porch swing. Said she wanted something of her own to sit on when her daughter came home from school. I said yes. Not because I was anyone's expert, but because sometimes showing someone else their strength helps you remember your own. Colt asked me one night, what do you want to call this place? We sat under the stars, River sleeping in the cradle. Colt carved wild roses blooming at our feet. I thought for a long moment. Then I said, Winstead. He smiled. Why? Because everything here was built with nails in the wind. The cabin never became a mansion.
And porch creaks sometimes. The roof leaks a little when the rain's heavy. But it's ours.
And every flaw is a line in the story we wrote without waiting for permission. Sometimes people come by just to sit, to be quiet, to watch River play in the dirt with a wooden spoon, chasing bugs and dreams. They say things like, it's peaceful here, because peace to me isn't quiet. Peace is earned, nailed down, beam by beam, choice by choice, and every time I walk past that fence line, I touch the carved word that started it all. Staying. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally understood what it meant. My son will grow up knowing the truth. That his mother didn't run. That his name came from movement, from storms, from rivers that cut through rock just by showing up every day. And when he's old enough, I'll show him the shovel that struck iron. The jar of nails Colt made, the rose bush we planted the day I said no to $500,000. And I'll say, this is what love looks like when you choose it for yourself. The wind still comes, but now it passes through a home that doesn't bend. A home that listens. A home that sings with nails in the wind. If this story stirred something in you, maybe it's because you've been told to sit down when your soul wanted to build. Maybe you've been underestimated. Or maybe, just maybe, you're standing on your own sycamore hill right now. So don't just watch. Breathe with, stay with her. Let her fight remind you of your own. Subscribe if you've ever been told to quit, and stayed anyway.